Welcome to those that are coming into the webinar. We're going to get started in just about another minute or so. Let some other folks come in.
We should have one of the Teams playlists playing in the background, like waiting music.
We didn't think about that. Sorry, guys. We'll have an awesome playlist at the next webinar. That's a great idea. So we'll go ahead and get us started just so that we're at the top of the hour. We've got tons of great content to go through today and a couple of great speakers. So welcome to our webinar, Beyond the Fringe, 6 Innovative Ways to Level Up Your Remote Culture. And before we begin, I'm just going to go over a few things about the webinar platform. For attendees, at the bottom of your screen, you'll have a few controls. The most relevant one is probably the Q&A button. So anytime you have a question throughout the webinar, you can go ahead and put your question in there. Our speakers will be addressing questions as they come up, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A section at the end. If after the webinar, we still have unanswered questions, we'll make sure that you get a personal response from one or both of the speakers afterwards. You'll also have the ability to see each other's questions before they're answered, upvote them and comment on them so you can interact with each other in that way. If you've got any technical questions, please put it into the Q&A and I will make sure to address them on the back end. And when we get to the Q&A portion, you'll also be able to raise your hand. So if you want to go ahead and ask a question out loud, I can unmute you during that portion. Please make sure to hold off on raising your hand until we get to the Q&A portion and use the Q&A box for your questions until that point. Also, after the webinar, you'll be receiving a link to the recording as well as the slide deck. We've got tons of useful links in here. We'll also be providing some templates and checklists for some of the materials that we're talking about today. So without further ado, I would like to go ahead and hand it over to our webinar speakers, Erica McMannes and Jordan Peace.
Thanks, Christina.
Thanks.
All right,
Welcome,
Jordan,
everybody.
We're here. You ready?
I'm ready. Let's do this. I wish I
Awesome.
could see everybody's faces, but that's okay.
I
I'll
know.
just imagine it.
Someday we'll be back on in boardrooms and maybe stages, right? Talking to live audiences. But this is great for now. Like Christina said, we are doing Beyond the Fringe today. We're going to have a conversation with Jordan Peace, CEO of Fringe, and we're going to focus in a little bit on the 6 innovative ways to level up your remote culture. We'll do some quick intros just so you know, one, why we know what we know, but more why we love what we love about remote work. Jordan, I'll let you kick us off.
Sure, that's a good way to put it. Why we love what we love. I think I love more than I know, but I'll share what insights I do have. Yeah, so like it says on the page, I'm one of the founders and the CEO of Fringe. We are a lifestyle benefits company. The idea of our company is to facilitate the ability for companies to, and many of you listening may know this already, to offer lifestyle benefits to their people down to the individual and make it all about choice and personalization. And so we might touch on that a little bit, but more importantly today, we want to talk about remote culture. You know, one of the things that actually caused our business to explode in a good way is this transition to remote work. And so it's just been really exciting for my company to be on the forefront of trying to help companies do this well. But there's a heck of a lot more than just lifestyle benefits involved in making your remote culture great. And so we're excited to share what we do now. Thanks, Erica.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm Erica McMannes, COO, and also co-founder at Instant Teams. And what we do at Instant Teams is we build high quality, ready to work remote teams across the globe. And we do that with our own technology that we've created, but also a very untapped group of professionals who are primarily from the military community. So we are able to build high quality customer support, tech support, operational support teams with military connected talent. And we work with companies like Walmart, Prudential, Amazon, and it's how we came to meet Fringe, because we build remote teams, we need remote culture, we need remote benefits and things that are a little bit kind of out of the traditional corporate feel of benefits, and Fringe fits right into there. So we've just been able to forge a relationship over the past, I don't know, year and a half now. I didn't even do a history check there, but sometime in that time frame. and other than loving Fringe and loving the platform, like you guys just get remote culture. And I know anytime we get on for a conversation, it's always a great one. So
agreed.
All right, so agendas are important. You've got two founders here, a CEO and a COO. We like to be sure that people have expectations and they know what's coming. You have some heads up. It's a part of some of what we'll talk about today about remote culture. So as we go through, these are the things that we're going to be talking about today. So if you see one of these bullets that kind of catches your attention, or you're like, okay, I'm going to really tune in then, it gives you time to kind of think ahead a little bit and maybe get some ideas or questions ready just by looking at these topics. So we're going to talk about just what is remote work and why it is important. We're going to go into some remote culture missteps that we kind of got together on ahead of time. And we're like, hey, what are the lessons learned, but more so the failures learned? And how can we start to share those with people as remote work is not going anywhere?
Right.
And then some really tactical things. We know your time is precious and we want you to be able to leave and say, hey, I heard about this thing. Let's go do this at the company. Or, hey, I know you lead a remote team. Like, you should try one of these tips I heard today on a webinar. And then we'll talk about some tools, and then we'll definitely leave time at the end to have Q&A. So get those questions ready, be thinking, tracking as we go through. And with that, Jordan, let's just start a little bit with kind of defining. I think we have a collective agreement on remote culture and remote work, but we do vary. So let's spend a little bit of time just kind of setting the stage before we hop into some of the tactical stuff on, you know, you as an individual, you as a remote founder, you as a founder of a product that remote teams use. What really is remote culture to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's so great about remote culture is we have an opportunity to create a similar, if not identical, experience for each and every person in our organization. And that's actually a really great thing. There's always been remote people, right? That's not a brand new concept, right? But there's always been those in that central office, and then there's been everyone else kind of on the outskirts, right? The outsiders. And that, I think, is just something that's very much been felt by those folks for a long time. And so for many that have been remote, this transition to remote culture is a significant upgrade, right? Now, all of a sudden, they're just as involved and their voice is just as loud and so forth. So, you know, to me, some of the aspects of remote culture that are so unique is that piece, is that we can create an equitable experience. I think another piece is that it involves family and those that folks live with so much more, right? Not only because they're occasionally on the screen or coming by, or there's a cat going across the desk, or in my case, a naked child running in or whatever, but like not only that, but they're listening in, right? They actually are aware of what's going on and and I don't know about you, Erica, but I find that transition that I used to have from like driving home or whatever, I would kind of switch modes. And so I would stop thinking about work and start thinking about family, but I walk out of that door and I'm still in work mode. And so they're going to hear a lot more of my processing and what's going on and what I'm excited about, what I'm frustrated about. And so as a result, I think that families are just much more integrated into the company culture when folks work remotely than when they're not. And so I think as a result, we've got to think about not just 8 hours a day, but that other 16 hours, and how do we impact those families and how do we invite them in? But I can let you take it from there.
Yeah, no, I love that you pointed out there's always been remote workers, but they were often kind of like the forgotten child or like lost. And that was actually my very first experience in remote work. It was 10 years ago. It was a Silicon Valley based company and everybody was in San Francisco. I was the one lone remote worker on the East Coast. And I can tell you there was no remote culture. It was San Francisco office culture. And they would have meetings and forget to invite me. They would forget that I didn't know things. And so that's always kind of been in my, you know, the background of my mind as we've built out a remote company to like, you've got to reach everybody, right? And so how do you do that? I was on a panel with a local accelerator group last week, and it was a professional argument, but there was disagreement over whether culture was more than benefits. And it was really interesting because you guys are kind of in the cusp of both, which I think is really cool.
We are.
But it was people who traditionally had maybe had 30 or 40 years in brick and mortar businesses. And to them, culture was benefits. It was just what you give people to make them happy because you're their employer. And then there was like kind of the startup scene group who's building remote work. And we were like, no, you're missing the whole point. And it was just a really interesting kind of conversation back and forth that benefits can be a part of culture, but to me, that's like the encompassing entity. And then you like build in pieces underneath that.
Right. I always say, because we're, for context for everybody, we are a benefits provider. I mentioned that before, but it's non-traditional benefits. But I always tell our salespeople, and I tell them their mentality as they go out and sell this thing is, if you run into a culture where people don't already love their people and aren't already generous with them, it's not going to be a good fit. We're not going to turn your culture around because all of a sudden you offer these cool benefits, right? We're a megaphone with which to say, we love you and we're going to be generous to you. That's what we are. So I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
I love the sub copy here on this slide because it says, how is it different from standard corporate culture? And I think there's like a catch to that, because I personally believe like remote culture is going to be the standard of corporations.
Right.
Right. And I think there's those of us for 5-10 years who've been like, well, we're all headed there, just wait. And of course it's happened probably a little sooner. But our corporate culture is remote. And I think we're just getting into an era of where all of these definitions are just going to take on such a different, appeal to employers, appeal to employees. So it'd be interesting to know, you all watching us, like whether you work remotely, whether you lead in a remote company, if you were just like, one of those night show interviews off the street, like what is remote culture? What would you have to say? I'd really like to kind of see some people's thoughts and ideas on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep the chat flowing as we go. You're going to prompt us into things that are going to be relevant to you, right? If you prompt us to do so. So we're happy to sort of dance to the music that you guys play.
Yeah, it's what makes this a little bit easier, right? Have totally. Some feedback. Totally. We can take it many ways, but we want to take it the way that you all are here to take something away from. So, well, with that, I think as we've already kind of said, we're in the early days of helping others build remote culture. Like we've taken it on ourselves. But there's some lessons learned along the way. Some of them are fun. Some of them were painful that brought you to like a final resting place. And let's walk through these a little bit. I'll let you kind of kick off with the concept of business first at every meeting. Tell us a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, so bear in mind the title here is Missteps. So I'm not advising business first. I'm telling that that's a problem, right? But so I think the temptation, because one thing that remote work does is most of us are all very, very efficient in remote work, right? And that's on the surface, that's a good thing. We're very on task and we're getting a lot done. And you probably could get done more in 5 hours remotely than you can in 8 or 9 in person. But the reason why is actually something that's like a variable that's actually very important, which is that social aspect with your either your employees or your colleagues that you work with. It's huge, right? And so we go into a meeting and here's the agenda. Let's knock it out. Let's get it done. Great, short meeting. We're done. And again, on the surface, that's good. But what's missing is before, or for some companies, maybe not necessarily Instant Teams, you guys have been remote for a long time, but that opportunity to walk to that meeting, right? Or to see them over at the coffee pot, or to, hey, let's get lunch today. And like those social interactions just don't happen. And so your best opportunity, in my opinion, is when at the beginning of those meetings, have 5 minutes, heck, have 10 minutes if it's an hour-long meeting, where you just talk, you just, how's your family doing? How, like share some common interests, whatever, it's okay. We don't need to be so efficient that we sacrifice relationships. So that's one misstep I see, that people are burning out on meeting after meeting because their meetings aren't socially fulfilling to any extent.
Yeah, and it can sometimes feel awkward to not jump right into business, right? Like it takes that willingness to be like, so how is everybody doing? And there's always going to be people who like try to answer that with a business question. You're like, no. Like, what'd you do this weekend? How are your kids? How,
you got to kind of push back.
Yeah.
It's not easy. I mean, it requires some of us to just kind of step up and lead in that way and show an example, like this is how we do things right? I care about you, and so one of our values at Fringe is people over task, for that very reason, just as a reminder of like, you're sitting in front of a human being that's got stuff going on in their lives.
Yeah.
One kind question won't kill the whole meeting or ruin the efficiency of your day,
Yeah.
so well worth it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of leads right into a number 2 misstep of, like I said, it kind of takes somebody to put themselves out there first, is
Yes.
not having somebody own it. And this is my favorite thing to say anytime I talk about remote work, is you have to have somebody who likes it lead it. If you just ask somebody with, hey, make sure all of our remote team members are great, and they, one, don't care about it, they don't get it, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
What does that look like at Fringe? Like who kind of owns that one? Maybe it's the, manifestation of remote culture, but also kind of the strategy behind it.
Yeah, well, originally, so we've gone, just for context, we've gone from 6 people a year ago to 40 today.
Oh, wow.
So it's been a big transition where the answer to every question of who owns it was one of the founders, right?
Right.
Like we own it, right? And that. And while that's okay, because that's what you got to do in the beginning, that was me, because I felt like, I'm the person with the most senior title here. And I'm a person that's passionate about it. And so if I show my passion and how much I care and so forth, then I'd imagine others will go, okay, this is real. This is like a integral part of the values of the company. This isn't just something that they task somebody with and said, just do what you can, right? And then we transitioned recently from, I'm still on that team and I'm a participator in that team of thinking about ideas and strategy, but the actual, we actually hired, and there's a team of 3 now, but we actually hired an employee engagement person full time. And he came in, employee experience, he would want me to say, not engagement. He came in, I told him, here's your job description. Make Fringe the best place to work on earth. That's it. That's the entirety of your job. And so he, along with Olivia, that is doing everything in our company. She's my EA. That's how she started, and that's how she came into the company. Now she's recruiting and doing culture, and so I probably need to double her salary now that I'm thinking about it. But she's doing a ton, and so the 3 of us, we get together at least once a week for an hour just to talk about what's the next thing we're going to do, how's everybody doing, surveying, programs, etc. But just having that one person that their full-time job is culture, it communicates the right thing. And, just having somebody own it, there's just no replacement for that.
Yep. It was funny, right before the pandemic, I saw a bunch of LinkedIn arguments over like, what's head of culture or head of remote? What is a chief remote officer? Like, those are such bogus titles.
Right.
People making up work for themselves.
Yeah.
And now 12 to 18 months later, people are realizing, oh yeah, that has to be led by somebody. Like it really does. And we're similar. I've always been the one, as 2 founders, like I've loved that piece of the business.
Yeah.
It's what I like to think about. It's what I like to do. Team members will call me on me like, hey, I need to brainstorm on some things for this, team specifically.
Right.
And our business is people. So we have a team and we build teams. And again, our scale from a core team of 2 to now a core team of 50, and we have over 500 total remote team members. We're still even in the learning phases of what remote culture means for 2 people, 10 people, 50 people, 500 people. And it's different, right? And so it's changing and it's evolving. And I think that's an important piece, is sometimes you just have to own that something has to change in order for the culture to keep growing and it to be hitting and connecting each and every person. Which, without preparing for, leads us right to number 3. I'm really good at these like segues without even and no script or anything. Another misstep is not staying high touch enough. And I think that's a hard balance in remote work, because people want to work async. They want to work when works best for them. They want flexibility. So it's easy to say, here's your job description, now go be great. And be hands off, right? Because as a founder who does everything, you're like, yes, somebody who can do this, please go do great things. But the other can happen where you don't know what that person's like, oh, he hasn't talked to me in like 4 days. I hope everything's okay, right? Like those stories we tell ourselves.
Right.
how do you kind of, what's kind of your approach to that balance of letting people do what you've charged them to do, but also staying in touch?
Yeah, I think, we really value trusting our people, right? And so to an extent, I think it's good not to check in all the time about their work, right? To say, how's that project going? Like, how's this go? Did you do this yet? Like, that feels like a lack of trust, right? Whereas a check-in on like, how's your week going?
Right.
Or like you shared with me last week that your daughter was sick, how's she feeling? That's a totally, you can be as high touch as you want on that stuff, right? And nobody feels like, oh, they're like on my back, right? They're looking over my shoulder, right? Because of what you're asking about, is the content of that. So, one of the things, I mean, I don't have this all figured out, but one of the things that I do is on Friday afternoons, I have a section carved out that it just says on my calendar, Fringer Love, who we call it, people Fringers. And I just love on people. So I just get on Slack or whatever the medium is that I normally communicate with them. And I just reach out to a handful of people every Friday, try to start a little conversation and just see how they're doing. And it's never about work ever. It's always just, how are you? And that's the beginning. And I think that communicates. And if I'm doing that and I'm telling others that I'm doing that, so I'm hoping that others are also doing that type of thing. And I think that's a huge piece. It's just, it's personal, like this whole notion that business and personal are somehow disconnected. I mean, hopefully that is totally in the trash can by now, because we realize that that's just not, everything is personal, and everybody feels whether or not they're really cared about, and people are looking out for them as people. So I think it's a huge mistake to go like, oh, they got it. Like, they don't need my help. So therefore they don't need my voice. They don't need my communication. The two are different.
Yeah. I love that you have it on your calendar. I have similar reminders, because it has to be intentional, right? And like you said, you're not just going to bump into somebody as, like you said, going down, oh, hey, you're new here. Nice to meet you. I'm so-and-so. Right. You kind of have to plug it in operationally. And I think that's a part of remote culture, right? It is all intentional. It does not happen by mistake.
Right.
And that sounds exhausting to some people. And honestly, some days it is exhausting, right? To like really be on top of that, but it's how it works. And it's how, I think, through both of our organizations, you can see it's how it works, is to stay on top of it.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, people are always, I don't mean this in a bad way, but people are always more exhausting than tasks, right? Like, people are so much more complex than emails, right? Or other things that we're doing, right? So yeah, it should exhaust us, but like, that's worthy work for us to do. And that's a good reason to be exhausted.
Yeah, well, I think you prepared us for this segue, as you mentioned, families and children and pets. And, my first experience with remote work, I had an infant, and it was the only way after, I'm a military spouse. And so we've moved 12 times in 19 years total. And there was lots of challenges with just career, anything. Yeah. My first kind of the chance I was given a remote work, I had an infant. And so if I was on calls, I needed to have that infant with me. And then that infant became a toddler. And I had seems like we could share a story about a naked child running across the camera. That's happened. So forgetting that people have more than what they bring to you on a Zoom call. Is totally critical. Critical not to forget.
Yeah, I mean, it's not much more we can elaborate on that. I think it's the same problem, is that the same problem as number one. It's the same problem as number three. We just get into task mode, right? And it's just, we need to get stuff done. We don't realize that our work is the people around us. Like, that is the work, right? Because when you have a great culture, everyone, all these great recruits want to come work for you. And all the customers get to enjoy your people enjoying what they do and enjoying their culture. The whole thing is it's just giant magnet, right? And so it's never not strategic to care about your people and focus on your people. And what do your people care about the most, right? Like, more than likely, the others in their household. Like, that's what they care about. And so if you're going to champion what they champion and care about what they care about, you not only cannot just forget about their families, but you have to actually actively involve their families in various ways. And, you know, some of the greatest feedback I've gotten is when we've taken the opportunities to do that. Like I remember our very first holiday party, and there was only a group of like, I don't know, like seven, maybe 8 employees at the time, but there were 40 people at the holiday party because we had spouses, we had children, there were gift bags for the children, there was swag like Fringe kid t-shirts for the kids, and every single one was like, this is the best holiday party I've ever had at any company ever. And it's because it's the first time I've ever had my family invited to it, but secondly, it was about our families. It was more about them than it was about me, and that communicated care to a degree that I've never felt, you know.
Yeah, we did that. It was virtual, but we did it was a campfire thing. So everybody came dressed up in like camping gear, and we hired like this group that they did scary ghost stories, and then we each had these little tiny s'mores kits that we did like on our desks together on camera. And then there was a scavenger hunt, and the kids got to participate, right? Like kids running around the house, bringing things back to camera. Okay, go find a flashlight, coming back.
Awesome.
So yeah, it is. People are whole people. And I think if anything, you know, comparing remote culture to corporate culture, like that's one thing that I hope just never comes back, is that you have to like have a completely different face of who you are. You know, I think back to like grandfathers who worked in machine factories. I mean, those families didn't exist when they walked through the door, and then it's such a cool but different time that I hope we continue to like really push forward and bring to the table. Totally. You keep bringing up tasks. Work requires tasks, right? Work requires work. Whether you're in a brick and mortar, whether you're in hybrid, whether you're in remote work. And so I think remote work has brought up a lot of questions, I think, because of the duality of being in a house and working. Also the increased efficiency and productivity, because everything is at your hands at all moments. You're not locked out from it. It's forgetting or neglecting mental health. So what are some ways that you all have kind of attend to that at Fringe? I know Fringe benefits, in the dashboard, there's a lot of cool things that you can use your Fringe points for, which I love, to assist with that. And that's a cool self-serving way for employees what they need, and then let them kind of concierge what they need to plug in to like fill the pieces of what they feel is missing. So
and I think the self-serve is great. And I'm so glad to offer that. And I'm glad that we have it. I know, because I know what happens on the back end, that the utilization is not very high, right?
Really? Interesting.
That folks are not using it nearly as much as HR departments are talking about it, or LinkedIn is talking about it. And I don't think it's because it's not needed. I think it's very needed. I think that when you have to say there's no stigma anymore about something, there's still a stigma, right? Like if you have to intentionally say that, there is. And I think the only way we break down the stigma is within each organization, right? Because you don't really care what LinkedIn says. You care what your coworker says. You care what your boss said. Like the people right around you are really the influencing force in our lives. You know that from being a parent, right? Like their friends' voices are like 10 times louder than their parents' voices, right? And so I think we have to lead from the front. I think it comes from leaders being vulnerable and being willing to say, I use this service. I see a counselor. I do this because of this, and it really helps me, and I don't have any shame about it, and I'm going to let the whole company know. Short of that type of leadership and that vulnerability, I don't know how you truly break down the stigma, right? I mean, you ever been in a group of friends, or I don't know, whatever, it's a book club, it's drinking buddies, it's, you know, it's a fantasy football league, whatever it is, and it's surface level for months and months and months. And then you share that one story about struggles, whether it's your marriage, your kids, or illness, and then all of a sudden the floodgates open, right? And everyone has a story to share, and everyone is invited to be vulnerable. And I feel like companies work the same way. And in particular, because it's a little bit more hierarchical than a group of friends, it needs to be the leaders that go first and to share that vulnerability. So that's my take on it. And so that's the way that I try to lead, is just to share I'm burned out, I need vacation, I need counseling, whatever it is that I am going through.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the leading from the front, especially as a founder, is the hardest part, because founder life, which could be a whole different webinar, I'm sure, is
yes.
It's kind of designed to kill you. Like,
Yeah.
it really is true. There's, interesting research, and you get into it, you're like, I was looking for some motivation. And apparently that does not exist out there for founders. So it's hard because sometimes you feel like it's not authentic. Like if, you're not attending to, or I'm not attending to what I need to take care of, but I'm telling other people to do it.
Right.
And that kind of popped up this summer. I think it's the first time in 5 years that I took a vacation and didn't take my laptop with me. And my 15-year-old taught me how to hide certain apps so that they were on my phone, but I didn't remember they were. And I was like, very intentional, like, get Erica out of work. I was like, well, maybe I should just check in here. And somebody reminded me, like, you have this great mandatory 1 week of paid leave for your internal team. They're not going to take it if you don't. I was like, oh, you're right. Like, you gotta step up and take it. So it is. It's a consistent, it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge.
It is.
You're taking care of yourself, and sometimes by proxy that allows others to take care of themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, let's get into a little bit of some tips. So these are some hacks, some like really specific things that people can like jot down and go try. I personally have conflicting feelings about this one. So let's get into that. I love Tammy. We work closely with Tammy. We've done all kinds of projects with Tammy. So no problems with Tammy, but to give people a call. I'll let you go with what your interpretation of is that first.
I mean, I think it's kind of the thing I was talking about earlier on Friday afternoons, where it's like, I've got an intentional list of people. It might be 3 or 4 that I'm going to reach out to, right? A lot of them, I don't have their phone numbers, right? So it's actually not going to be a call, right? But I want to pursue them for 5 minutes every once in a while, just to go, hey, I'd like to talk to you. I want to know how you're doing. I know, like, it didn't have to. I think a phone call is nice when you can do it. I think hearing someone's voice and hearing that, or it could be a Zoom or whatever, but like hearing their voice and understanding that the words that are kind of being typed, or like there's meaning, there's feeling, there's, like there's emotion behind it. I think that's really nice. I don't think that people want to necessarily get like a call out of nowhere from their CEO. Like, it probably would be a little like disconcerting, but so for me, I have to have a little bit of a different style, and like I Slack them, and it's very casual, and it's, they're trying to scare anybody. I don't know why I would be scary, but with a peer, right, it's different, right? With a peer, like, yeah, you just give them a call, or, set up a Zoom or whatever. But I think it's really about focused one-on-one attention to this human being. I think that's what is behind what Tammy's advice is here.
Yeah. I think, like, it goes back to your high touch, right? Like, give people the time to know them. So you actually brought up like why I felt conflicted about the phone. Well, 2 things. One, I'm an introvert, and if you just call me out of the blue, I'm probably not going to.
You're not going to pick up.
Like, it's just who I am. But I also asked people, when I saw these slides, I was like, hey, if I just called you out of the blue, what would you think? And they're like, oh my gosh, I would probably think something is wrong. And so then I like kind of did a self reflection. I'm like, well, what part of our culture is that? And I think it's that we are so ingrained in Zoom or Slack that phone just isn't a part of our culture. So like, as you build a remote culture, if you want a phone to have certain purposes, and I know that sounds so strange, but this is what a phone call would be used for in our company. Like, you almost have to go to those lengths.
Intentionality, right?
Yes. And I think we've even seen in like younger generations of, upcoming professionals, like regular phone calls are just not normal. Like, have you ever seen a kid try to like talk on a phone without on FaceTime? Like, they get all like weird with it.
Yes.
So I think like there's all kinds of ways that like the phone concept is something that it'll be interesting to watch over the next 10 years even.
Totally.
But I think the tip would be like high touch, right? Reach out to people, let them know you care, let them know that you're tracking.
And by the way, for context, so these these tips, these are actually not coming directly from Erica or I. These are coming from my podcast, Bragworthy Culture, and the guests that are listed here. There is advice that we've received. So it's actually spread out amongst a bunch of different companies and their ideas and so forth. So feel free to reach out to these folks as well. They're hyperlinked to their LinkedIn profiles in the slide.
Yeah, and each one of these 6 tips, like these are entire episodes full of awesome advice and conversation, and which is cool. Like what we're presenting here today, like obviously, like it doesn't end. There's all kinds of, you know, follow-on opportunities to engage and to learn more and to continue to see whether you're watching today concerned about building a remote culture, or you're in a culture that you're like, yeah, we could do better, or you're an employee that has no control over the culture and you're looking for ways to make, you know, suggestions. Each and every one of these hopefully can add a little value to that.
Yeah. By the way, we need some questions.
I know.
I'm watching the
Q&A. Getting some encouragement now and then, but no questions yet. So tell me a little bit about this episode. Right? The tip is focus on belonging. And we actually had a conversation in-house yesterday about, you know, retention, people being really involved and ingrained in like the bigger picture outside of themselves and their daily work. And I think that comes down to belonging. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So in particular, I mean, if you only get a chance to listen to 1 or 2 episodes, listen to Erica's, obviously, and then listen to Cassandra's. Cassandra's is just fantastic. I personally learned a ton from her. I asked her ahead of time, like, hey, can we get into like DEI conversation? Like, are you cool with that? Because it's sensitive, and she was very open to that. And I asked her, like, what's this whole like B that's been added here recently, right? Like, what's the B? Why is there a B? And the way she described belonging to me was that diversity, equity, and inclusion are standards, they're processes, they're focuses that arrive at belonging. That's the goal. And I'm like, oh, that is so helpful to me. Yeah, that's awesome. You know, like we're not doing DEI for the heck of it. We're doing it for the sake of belonging, right? So that people feel representation when they come in for an interview and they say, I see people like me that look like me. That's important. But also there's an element of safety, like as a person of color, or as a woman, or as someone with a sexual orientation that's not the norm. Yeah. I feel when I come in, I'm going to belong here, right? That's the goal. And it was just such an incredible learning experience for me because I'm a white male, right? Everywhere I go, I feel as though I belong, right? And that's privilege, right? It's nothing I can do about that. That is just my realities, my experience of life, not true of everyone else, right? It's just not. And so that is just such a helpful word for me, and just a helpful lesson for me to try to facilitate an environment where people are going to instantly, if not, you know, very quickly feel like I'm at home here. I can be me. And so I actually took that into our values. We put the phrase, be the same person all the time. Because I wanted people to know you don't have to context switch when you come into working at Fringe, right? You don't have to be who you are out there and then be a different person in here. And I think what I've learned is that a lot of people feel the need to do that they code switch depending on where they are and who they're with. And so just an incredible lessons from Cassandra. I really highly recommend listening to that, or even just reaching out to her, because she was really the brilliance behind that episode, not me. But I learned a ton.
Do you think remote work allows just naturally a little bit more to bring your natural self than a corporate setting?
I think if you do it right, it invites it, right? If you're involving the family and it's high touch and it's right, because like we talked about earlier, there's not a lot of context switching that's happening for any of us in terms of our time. There's not like that drive home or whatever, where it's like, okay, I'm getting into it's all interconnected. And so I think instead of fighting that, we should invite that, right? And like, yeah, bring your whole self to work. Like, really, you know, like the things that are going on in your struggles and your like, and if you invite that vulnerability, people will do it, you know.
We've got one question that can kind of fit in here. At least my response to this question would, and it's kind of off the cuff, so get ready, Jordan. But what personally has been the most difficult remote culture situation you've been in, and what did you do? I mean, so obviously that can take on lots of forms or fashions, but like one of the most difficult things that I've experienced is when team members have experienced tragedy.
Yeah.
And you are thousands of miles away versus being in an office where you can hug or drive them somewhere or like physically help, like, you know, like teary-eyed thinking about it. But like those are really the hardest remote moments for me, is like the distance, when distance matters, is sometimes the difficult piece. And it's hard because, I mean, yes, you can get on a plane and fly to where you need to fly, but sometimes that's just not, you know, available in the moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of takes us to like a little more sensitive side of, you know, culture, but
I agree fully. We just had one of our developers lose his dad pretty suddenly, and how do we engage with him? We can't talk to him. You don't want to bug him because you feel like any reach out from somebody at work feels like a tug on like, and it's not intended to be, hey, when are you coming back to work? It's intended to be, how are you actually doing? Right. But just by reaching out could give the wrong vibe. Right. So yeah, that's a piece that, you know, we're figuring it out as we go, but kind of hard to replace a hug.
I know.
Right? It's like how do you do that?
Like the hardest piece of remote work sometimes is just like a physical high five or a hug, right?
Yeah, totally. So no, I agree. I think it is in the midst of tragedy. Excuse me.
So another really good tip is, I think in order to be intentional, you've got to have data, right? You got to know what course to chart and how do you get there. And I think that is hearing from where it matters. And a lot of that is, you know, surveys or knowing from your teams what they actually want or need. We do it a couple different ways at Instant Teams, but tell me a little bit about, you know, you guys at Fringe, and then also some of the tips that came out of the podcast here with Sprinkler.
Yeah, I think we've got some more formal things in terms of like surveys that go out and they're using a survey tool and we're trying to understand the feedback. But we also use Slack a fair bit just to do surveys like more routinely, you know, like simple stuff. Like if you were to, like, I don't know, one recently, which food delivery service do you use the most? DoorDash, Uber Eats, this and that. And it was like, just for your, in case you're interested, like 90% of people pick DoorDash. And we're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Not Grubhub, didn't get any love at all. And so we ended up getting a DoorDash pass for the whole company that they can now get food, you know, without paying the delivery fee and so forth. But so sometimes it's just little things like that, like what would delight you, right? And then the other piece that's, you know, this person I mentioned, this employee experience person that's come in full time. One of the things that he's doing is having a 10-minute meeting, like perpetually, like a 10-minute meeting every quarter, twice a year, something like that, with every single employee, and just going, like understanding their preferences, how they're doing, what are you enjoying, what are you not enjoying, are you aware of these things that we offer, and just asking a good amount. And then there's just great tools too. And I want to hear what you guys do, but I've always been a fan of Culture Amp, and we've been considering lately using them for this. So just getting it in the budget. So yeah.
So we do it a couple different ways. One, because Slack is kind of like our office space, right? Like it's where like the moving, breathing business happens. We actually have a bot named Max. So it's through a service called Humaxa, and you can, on the back end of your dashboard, like set up pre-prompted questions, or if an employee like wants to just give feedback, there's like a command \Max on Slack. And so it's kind of like an open door, open feedback loop. And all of that is our employee engagement, you know, people operations team responds to those, then we kind of aggregate it. It rolls up what you're almost kind of like NPS for your internal employees, which is really great because then it shows you your top detractors, your top promoters. You're like, all right, this quarter, people aren't feeling like they have friends. So next quarter's programming, we're going to fix that. And it's just a really cool, like real-time feedback loop. And so we've had great success with that. Something I've done, I think I've only done it twice, and it's meant to be, it's kind of like a freeze moment. Like, especially as a founder, I think you can feel those moments when you're like, okay, everybody's like, it's even weird remotely, you can still feel tension, right? Like it's a rough day, there's things happening. And sometimes when I can kind of sense those moments, we've done like a freeze survey where in Slack, I'm like, stop what you're doing, take 3 minutes and tell me what's happening. But it's, it's like a form feedback. So it's very, it can be tracked and you can tell like, oh, 17 people in 3 minutes have told you this is the problem. Now we know what the problem is.
Yeah.
And I think, measure employee delight, but it's also important to gather what's not going well. Like what is not delightful in the company, and being vulnerable enough to say, I need to know the good, the bad, and the ugly in order to really delight, as the end goal.
Yeah, I love it.
And then what we just did recently is we have a quarterly survey that we also do. And every quarter we keep getting people mentioning more recognition. And when we would put new programs into place and we would do new things and we would have awards and we would have prizes, and it just kept happening. And I kind of had a moment of, well, what are we missing?
What do they mean? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what it was. I was like, recognition means something different each individual, almost like a love language. And so we put together kind of like a love language without calling it love language. It's like, how do you feel recognized? Here's 3 types. Tell us which one. So gathering that this quarter to then kind of look at some programming and to be equitable to all, but realize that some people want to be shouted out to on all social media platforms, right? They want their names in lights. They want people to know that they were the employees selected by their peers. Right. Others would like shudder and like maybe never come back to work if you did that to them. Like they want a small treat, or they want to have a 15-minute coffee chat with just one person. And, like people are individual and they're recognized in different ways. So it's kind of an aha moment that we've had the last quarter.
I love that.
All right, moving on to number 4, schedule thinking time. I think intentional is probably a word that we've said, if we had a word cloud going, intentional would be there. It would be there. And we had a great kind of pre-conversation about you have to be intentional with time to think. And so walk us through that a little bit.
Well, it's funny. One of the things you just said was unscheduled, but it worked, right? The freeze survey. Stop and tell me what you're going for 3 minutes. That's all it took was 3 minutes. And they probably got that off their chest, felt like, okay, someone else knows, someone else cares what I'm going through. And then you got awareness of what's happening. And I'm sure able to offer some sort of support, whether it's, just empathy or, some sort of solution maybe. But larger than that, I think that, we kind of, the way business is talked about, and I think incorrectly, is that you have these C-suite folks and these other leaders that are supposed to do the thinking and the strategy and the vision and the direction and yada, 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 right? And everyone else is supposed to perform this more narrow duty of like, this is your job, like do this thing. What the problem is, those that are doing those tasks, those duties, they often know far better than those leaders how that could be improved, right? And how it could be expanded, or how it could be made easier, or a tool that would help, or whatever. But if we're relying on those that are disconnected often, and we try not to be disconnected as leaders, right? But sometimes we are. And if we're disconnected, then we don't know best. So we're going to come in with our suggestions and all of our strategy and all of our big important meetings that we had to think about it, right? And give bad advice sometimes, right? Like, here's how I think you could be more efficient, right? Whereas if that person that's actually doing the job took 30 minutes a week, an hour a week, something like that, where nothing was on their calendar, no one was allowed to put anything on their calendar, and they just thought, I don't know, you journal about it, whatever it is you need to talk out loud, grab your spouse and talk the ear off, whatever it is, to just process. Not like they always say, like, get out of your, like, instead of working your business, like work on your business. Like, I think everybody's job should be treated the same way. Think about what you're doing and whether or not it's the right way to be doing it and how you can improve. And I think it's just a really healthy thing too. And helps people feel ownership. Like, this isn't just a task I was assigned. This is mine, and I'm going to figure out how to do it best.
Yeah. It's almost that self-care thing, right? Like we call it like heads down. Like if you see heads down or you see like a little Slack emoji, like respect that there is thinking time or there's something is being done in that moment. But again, back to the like own what you practice or practice what you preach is if the heads down time is on your calendar and you're on Slack, tasking people or asking for updates,
right?
Like not practicing, what you need everybody else to do.
Right.
So,
Right. And this, it's a countercultural thing, it really is. I mean, I have thinking time, and it literally says thinking time on my calendar for 4 hours a week, 2 hours on Tuesday, 2 hours on Thursday. And Olivia can attest to this. We had so many people scheduling over that. I mean, just blatantly just throwing stuff right in the middle of that thinking time and I fussed at them about it. But then finally I had to make it an out of office event so that no one could, so that it would get declined. So it just shows you there's just maybe a little bit of a lack of respect for how important it is to think, and to stop doing things, right? And so I think we just need to lead in that way, but also be really determined to just like, no, you're not going to schedule overthinking time. I'm going to think. I don't care if this big client needs something. I don't like that. I get that, but there's always going to be someone who needs something. The company needs each of us to think. And so it's one that you might have to fight. You might have to wrestle with people a little bit to get them to do this.
It's a work in progress.
Yeah.
One of the things that I love is that this came up as something from one of your podcasts because it's something that we've implemented to Instant Teams, and it's like a part of our Slack profile. As a user guide. And I'll shout out to Ann Shones. She was our first hire outside of Liza and I, our first like people operations person. She's now part of the tech team. Like she's got a cool story internally at the company. But she had brought this whole concept of like a user guide. And I'll be honest, when she first brought it up, I'm like, what? Like you flip through like how to use your washing machine? Like what is a user guide? And she's like, well, yeah, kind of. Like, what are the things I need to know about you? Your likes, your dislikes, how the things that to like might trigger you in a conversation, like just how does Erica function? So walk me through what this, kind of came out of this podcast. And I really love this. I think it's a really cool tool to, again, intentionally give insight to who we are as people.
I mean, I'll be honest. I don't have a great, like, we haven't implemented this yet, to be honest with you. And it's something we're starting by gathering data, right? So we're starting with these 10-minute interviews to ask all the questions, not all the questions, some of the questions necessary to begin to build this thing out. But I want to make sure that we have a process for adding to and updating it as we go, right? Like I joked with you before that, like, I think I was an extrovert until I had kids, like, and now I think I'm an introvert, right? So like people do change to a degree over time and they have different needs. And, one of the things about Fringe when we started it was this idea that like someone might need a gym membership today and they might need like just books to read because they're sitting around with an infant tomorrow, right? Like it needs change, right? And even desires change. And so before we do that, I want to make sure that we have a way, to really make that a dynamic document. But I love what you guys are doing. I'll be honest with you. I'll probably just hit you up for, advice on that.
To share, like ours are actually, it's a template on a Google Doc. So it's meant to be usable at any time. You decide you don't like Twizzlers anymore, you go take Twizzlers off your list. You decide like you've got a new hobby, you go update it.
New favorite Starbucks drink. It's like, I got to put pumpkin spice latte in there for the fall.
Right. We're breathing, changing human beings, right? Like user guides should be breathing documents. So it's fun. It's a really cool way to put in front of people access to get to know people, like that kind of like water cooler concept. And to know when you have those moments of getting on a call, like, oh, hey, I noticed on your user guide, you've traveled to Australia 17 times, right? Then it shows intention, like, oh, they cared enough to like kind of look me up before we got on a call. And it all kind of works together.
Totally.
All right, as we're wrapping up into time, and we got a few more things to talk about, changing the way you run meetings. So I think that kind of loops back to the beginning of kind of where we started with just hopping on and getting straight to business. But the actual like structure of how meetings are run in a remote culture can take off many different forms. And this is you're on this slide. So tell
I'm
us
here. This is just coming out of my brain. Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things, one of which we discussed, one of which is part of the agenda should be personal, right? That's really, really important. There was a question earlier that I thought related to this as well. It was number 2 on the ones that that we posted internally here. For companies where not everyone is remote, how might your approach be different, right? So when I say that we need to create an equitable experience for everyone, like that means doing things that are going to feel a little odd at first, right? So as an example, we're building out in Richmond, where the majority of our employees are, but not everybody, a clubhouse, right? And the clubhouse is not you're not required to go there. You don't have to spend any time there, but it's an offering of, hey, if you want to get away from family, get out of the closet like I'm in right now, and be somewhere like in a co-working space, you can. So I was talking to some of my co-founders and some others around like meetings when we've got 2 or 3 people in the clubhouse and maybe 2 or 3 that are remote, and they're like, oh, we can just sit around the conference table and then we'll put them up. And I'm like, no. You're all going to go to individual booths on your individual computer, and you're going to have the same equitable experience of that person in Austin, Texas, or in San Diego, where you're not going to sit as a group and chit chat, and they're going to try to, can I get a word in edgewise, right? Because that's the old remote culture, right? We're not going back to that. And they were like, oh, yeah, you're right. That's weird, but yeah, I think you're right, you know? And so I just think we just have to really focus on that and really understand that if you have more than one person in a physical space at a time, you're going to dominate the conversation if you're on one camera and on one mic. It's just what happens naturally. So I think that's a piece of it as well. And then I think too, it's the way, you know, thinking about meetings, we have to be even more intentional about when we have meetings, right? We have to think about like blocks of time where we can all agree these are good times that we can have meetings, right? Because potentially, and you're going to see more in organizations, people aren't going to necessarily just lean towards, we all work from 9 to 5 or 9:30 to 5:30, and then we all don't work, right? If you're going to ask people that are parents and others to, you know, sort of lean into this work from home thing, they're going to get interrupted. They're going to have a sick kid. They're going to have whatever. And so we need to make sure that we have boundaries of like, I'm not having meetings during this time because I need this time for my personal life. And then I'm going to do some more work at night on my own. So there's a lot to consider there.
Yeah. The time zone thing is definitely something that we've even done, like core hours, depending on who your director is, because I mean, we have global team members, right?
Sure,
and
right.
Your huddle is at 9 a.m. every morning, East Coast. Well, you're gonna have somebody waking up at 3 a.m. Like that's not great culture, right? Like that's not how that needs to work. So it really is like taking that holistic picture of like who is involved, what is the content, is it important at what time of day?
Yeah.
And then just one quick thing that our CEO does is she doesn't let anybody be on mute when she's leading.
Oh, I love that. I meant to say that.
It's a really easy one. And at first I was kind of like, yeah, but then what if you hear noises? And she's like, that's exactly the point. She's like, if you intentionally you have a thought and you have to like wait your turn to unmute, you're not just going to bring it to the table.
Totally.
So, you know, unless you're in just someplace where that's not amicable to the meeting, but like stay off of mute and stay on so that you can interject. Go ahead and interrupt somebody. You know, that's how we show, oh yeah, so sorry, go ahead, keep going.
Right. Yeah. And me doing what I'm doing now, going, right. Yeah. I agree. That little verbal feedback is just so important. We do a stand up. We call it a what's going on meeting every Friday. And I address the whole company. And I have to be more determined about this, but I've like begged people to not mute themselves. But on the whole, because there's 40 people on the call, they mute themselves and I talk for 20 straight minutes. And I feel so uncomfortable. I'm just like, someone give me some verbal feedback. It's awful.
Yeah, it is. It really works better to have, interaction and exchange.
That's a great
All right.
idea.
Well, I'm getting notices that we are running up on time. So
We
I want
are.
to be sure that we can kind of wrap up. These slides will be going out to everybody. These are just great tools that can be used for various reasons. Everywhere from like the operational side of a remote company to Fringe here being the premier of kind of the benefits perks side of an organization, and just some other tools that we use. If anybody has specific questions about any of these, they're hyperlinked. You can check them out. It might just kind of be a surprise. You don't know what you're clicking on when you click on Greetable. I promise that you'll be excited when you get there. Anything on these tools to mention before we kind of head into our closing statements, Jordan? What's your favorite off of this list?
Well, other than Fringe, obviously. Yeah. I probably really enjoy some of the games that we play together, like Jackbox games and Code Words. Those links are both like just fun. Like you just feel like you're sitting around a kitchen table with friends at night, like playing a board game. And, I think that type of, it's not the same interaction, but it's as close as you can get. And I don't know, it just makes people feel like my friends as opposed to my employees or coworkers all the time.
Yeah, I talked about getting vulnerable as a leader. I like games and I like to think of weird games. I was a preschool teacher in a previous life.
Okay.
So I get really creative. And we did one last week. I'll have to share it with you offline, but I was like, people might not get this, but the people who played it loved it. And then we didn't explain to those who didn't actually what the game was quite yet. So kind of build up suspense for the next time.
Nice.
Can't forget to have fun, as we're going through it all.
Yeah, I'll keep you posted. We're doing our first virtual escape room tomorrow. So I'll let you know how that goes.
Yeah. I would love to hear. All right. Give us kind of your a recap on Fringe, how people can connect with you, and I'll do the same, and then we'll kind of close. Any lasting questions?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think as far as connecting with me, just reach out on LinkedIn. I monitor my LinkedIn. Olivia monitors my LinkedIn as well. So we have two people focused on making sure that we are really responsive and so forth. But yeah, I think in terms of Fringe, like I said, I focus on your culture, right? Like Fringe is not some magical tool that's going to turn around a culture and make everybody feel wonderful. It is a megaphone with which to say, hey, what you're in the family, and therefore we're going to give you these lifestyle benefits to support you at home, to support your family, to give time back in your day and reduce stress and spark joy. That's what we do. And I think we do it better than anybody else does it. I do believe that. But I think your culture has to already feel the way it needs to feel before you can enhance it. Right. And that really comes down to intention and leadership. But yeah, reach out to me anytime. LinkedIn's probably the best way to do that. And then of course, our website is just fringe.us.
Awesome. I will say my favorite Fringe benefit. So two things. One, I love saving up points and gifting them. It's one of my favorite things to do, like busy day, projects done. Hey, here's extra Fringe points.
Yeah.
But I just paid for a year subscription to Bark. I have a 10-year-old and 15-year-old boy, and they have electronic devices, and I'm blown away by what Bark can do and what it gives you insight to as a parent. Whole other webinar topic, I'm sure.
Yeah, it is.
But it was so cool. I'm like, oh, I get to go pay for my year-long membership with my Fringe points. So it's just, it is. I just love it. I love that you can kind of concierge and handpick what you want. And yes, us at Instant Teams, like we mentioned, we're a highly tech-enabled managed services company. We're building remote teams for companies across the nation, as well as running it with a remote team ourselves. Connecting with me, I love all topics of entrepreneurship, founder life, the military spouse employment conversations. Really love to just get to know people and figure out how I can help or where we can bring insights as far as Instant Teams. If you're looking to build a team or looking to make references for people who know remote work and they know great teams, we're here to do that. And Jordan, I just want to thank you for your time today. We always have great conversations, and we are not far enough apart that we should not have had an in-person get together. So that will be next on the list.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so much. And Jordan, thank you. Thank you for your team and working with us to get this put together. And any asking questions that come through, we'll be sure to get to you guys either through social media or through email follow-up. And thank you all so much.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye. Thanks, Jordan.
All right. Bye-bye.